Took a ride with little old Lucy Brown. We went to all the honky-tonks. We really got around. She's 5'2" with eyes of blue and pretty as a queen. I didn't know her pop was a city cop and she was just 15. Good morning, Judge. Why do you look so mean, sir? And Mr. Judge, what can the charges be? If there's been trouble, I will plead not guilty.
Hello, my name is Mark Carlo. Today my guest is attorney Bill Kelly, who is running for the 148th District Court Judgeship in Corpus Christi, Nueces County, Texas. Thanks for coming on, Bill.
I'm glad to be here.
I've had the last couple of years problem people coming on because everybody's so busy now on Saturdays, you know?
Yes.
Years ago, is everybody working 6 and 7 days a week now? Is that the story?
Well, that's not unusual for me. So.
Right, isn't that awful? What kind of life is that? So, you're running for 148th District Court Judge. It's a position that is open because of Mr. Guy Williams. Judge Guy Williams is not going to run again. Obviously, there was some issues regarding whatever scandal or problems, I guess an actual indictment or allegations. So, it left the seat open, and there's Mark Stolle is also running as a Republican, correct?
Yes, he is.
And I just saw this, Jeff Rank also?
Jeff had announced that he was going to run, but for various reasons he stepped down.
Oh, okay.
He did not actually file the application, so he won't be on the ballot.
I see. Who's he? What does he practice?
He does some family law, criminal, civil.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I probably know him by sight, but probably
You may know his father, John Rank.
Right.
Practiced here for years.
Right. I remember the name. I don't know if I ever practiced with him. In terms of having anything, counter in court.
Right.
So, and then on the Democratic side, I think I was told, but couldn't find it. Is Carlos Valdez running as a Democrat?
Carlos Valdez is announced, and Deborah Rios.
Okay. So Carlos Valdez is running as a Democrat. So obviously, when is this primary that the Republicans are running against each other?
March 6th.
March 6th. So I'm going to have to try to get this show right away to make certain, and we'll post it on YouTube.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah. No, we should get it on, hopefully next week, and put it on YouTube or whatever, get you some exposure. It's only fair, as I said, Mark Stolle was on. You're primarily a family law attorney, right?
Yes. Well, now in my practice, I'm primarily family law. But when I started out, I was doing defense work, representing people who were accused of negligence in car accidents. And
you were an insurance defense lawyer?
Yes, I was.
Oh, my heart. Oh, where at?
Here.
For who?
Farmers Insurance.
Was it a firm or I can't
remember?
remember?
Well, yeah, Keyes and O'Reilly to begin with, and then law offices of William Keyes.
Oh, okay. For some reason, I didn't know that William Keyes did insurance defense work.
We did insurance defense, we did family, and we represented several school districts.
Interesting. That's interesting, eclectic kind of practice.
It exposed me to quite a bit. Yes.
Sure. The only time I did insurance defense as a law clerk in Houston, some years ago when I was in the University of Houston. That's my only experience with it. I didn't have some of my friends teased me about it. I didn't have any great moral repercussions about it. I didn't think that I was oppressing anybody or anything. I kind of enjoyed the practice, my limited experience. I enjoyed it.
Well, it didn't feel oppressive at all to me. People are accused of negligence. They're entitled to be represented in court. And
I'm sorry.
You don't. If you're gonna sue someone, you should be able to prove their negligence and justify your damages.
Well, what I found in civil law, though, I found more abuses, I think, in sometimes, what do you say, in the process, in the procedure, in civil law. Sometimes the insurance defense firms, they have more money and they contribute, I think, pretty well to some of the judges' campaigns. And I could say that I've had a couple of, I can't say that the civil personal injury cases I've tried that I was ever exactly felt that I was treated fairly. I will say that.
Well, you were doing that in Houston.
No, I did that
Oh,
here.
here?
Well, no, but we're talking about some years ago now. I
Okay.
would tell you this, and I know this sounds like I'm being whatever obsequious or the bench is much better than it used to be.
I think we've got a good group of judges.
We do. And some years ago, and one of those wasn't, yeah. Well, I won't get into it, but I do think the bench has improved markedly over the years.
I think we've got good judges. There have been times when not so good.
Right. We right. When we started practicing, and some of them I even personally liked. Margarito Garza, God rest his soul, he was such a character.
Yes, he was. He was a character.
And you know, and
it was hard not to like Margarito.
Oh, he had a tremendous heart, and he had no. He's kind of like what some people would say about Donald Trump. He had no filter. He just say whatever comes in his mind, right?
Okay, you can have judges. You're talking about legal scholars who have a clear understanding or superior understanding of the law, apply it well, and then you do have some judges who are more equity judges.
That's right.
But if they've got a good moral compass, that is something that is okay.
Well, I think he did have a good moral compass.
I think so too.
And of course, I was young and I was defending people accused of criminal conduct, and you know, Margarito, again, God rest his soul, he took every case to heart. This is such a big deal, this case, and especially with the young people, he would say outrageous things to them. One time, he told one of my clients, I believe it was, maybe not, maybe I was just in the courtroom. I got a baseball bat right behind my desk, right behind my bench here, right here, and I'm going to beat the S out of you. I'm going to beat the S out of you. Yeah, I'm going to do it. He would say stuff like that, God rest his soul.
I'll tell you a story about Margarita,
Mm-hmm.
and my esteem of him went up dramatically. I tried a case as a younger lawyer, and I was trying it against a much older lawyer who should not have been practicing anymore. A much older lawyer, and
Mm-hmm.
he was making mistakes, and he in his time he had been an extraordinary trial lawyer, and Margarita knew him from when he had been an extraordinary trial lawyer, and he was making mistakes where he should not have been able to put on his case. And Margarita let him put on his case. He was overruling my objections despite me showing him the law, showing him the cases.
Right.
And at the end, he granted my relief. And then I realized that, I did have the better case in that instance, but I realized that Margarita was sophisticated enough to handle that situation in a dignified way, and I was impressed with it.
That's interesting. Yeah, he was quite the character. He had a big heart. He was very upset when young Mexican Americans would get in crime. He
Mm-hmm.
couldn't involve in crime, and he'd say that. He would say things like that too. If he took it to heart. And I sometimes am a little bit disappointed through the years that the structure the way we're supposed to act is so restricted now. You're not allowed to lose your temper. That's the worst thing in the world. I don't think that's the worst thing, and Margarito used to do that. Again, God rest his soul. But I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. I think the worst thing is obviously corruption or dishonesty or deceit, But a lot of times I think in the modern world, especially the political world, and we'll talk about that in a second, you were in, a lot of times you're supposed to, it's just how much you smile, and your personality. It's personality driven, not issue driven. Not a lot of times issue driven. It's image and it's the selling of a political candidate sometimes.
I think you can get away with that for a certain amount of time, but if there is no substance, people figure it out. You can't be an empty suit. I don't think.
That's interesting.
So yes, you can sell something for a short time, but especially if you get the job and you don't have the ability to do that job, you can smile all you want, but people will figure it out.
Yeah, I would have a lot of agreement with that. So right now, we were talking before the show, you actually have practiced some period of years, and we were talking about our urban experiences as being property owners of older buildings. This was a fourplex, and your place was a home.
Single family home.
Single
yes.
family home, large single family home. And our experience in owning these properties and the frustrations and rewards.
Well, the building themselves are their own reward. Owning, you can take pride in owning a building like
Yeah,
this.
it's kind of like a work of art.
So you are preserving the
Yeah.
history of the community,
Right.
and that should be commended. But yes, it is a labor of love.
It is.
And you've got to want to do it because it is way cheaper to own a modern building, and you don't have nearly the same problems with a modern building that you would with an older building.
Well, it's even, well, our rent, one thing that I mischaracterized 30 years ago for several reasons, but I had no ideas that rents would stay so cheap in Corpus Christi.
I think that's going to change soon.
Do you think? I don't know. Now, I just read that the Frost building just went up, is going up for auction. Did you read that?
I did not. I'm
Yeah.
surprised.
Yeah, so I don't know. And then the RTA, they built a huge building to compete with, I don't know.
And they built a larger building to have rental space to be
Right,
a part of that
which I
building.
didn't
Right.
agree with. I thought that was awful to compete with the private owners of rental properties. I thought that was very inequitable. What would you have done if you were on city council? I don't know that you could have done anything.
Well, the RTA's got its own budget and is a taxing entity, so you, as city council person, you don't get to tell them how to spend their money. They've got their own board that does that.
Well, it's probably not a good segue, and I'm probably getting off point, but let's talk about you were on city council from what years?
2001 to 2009.
2001 and 2009. And we were trying to, you'd been on the show when you were on city council, this public
Yes.
access show, and we're trying to, kind of figure out what year it was, and I don't know that we ever came real close. I would tell you, I'm going to brag about lawyers who I've had my problems with, but I think that when we had those lawyers on city council, and maybe some of them I didn't personally like, but I thought they did a good job on city council. And there were various through the years. Were you all on there together? There was Mike Hummel, and there was Brent Chesney, and there was Melody Cooper, and there was you. Were you all on there at one time?
No.
Okay.
When I got on there, Melody was on there and Brent was on there, and I don't think either of them were on when Mike came on. Mike was on my last term,
Okay.
from 7 to 9.
Well, and speaking again, this is my opinion. I think we did a lot better when we had lawyers on city council, because I don't know that if you're not an attorney that you have the ability to maybe read fast enough or thoroughly enough or ask the appropriate questions to the appropriate sources. So I was relatively pleased with the job that you were doing.
It was well, thank you for relatively pleased.
Well, look, I'm not why I'm saying relatively pleased. I'm not an expert on all this stuff. I mean, even though we do the show and I've had some political involvement, I don't know. I'm just saying I don't remember that there was anything scandalous enough there going on or incompetent enough that I said, man, I got to run for something because this whole thing is like blowing up.
It was a special time. That decade was a special time because, I think in part because of the decisions that the council was making. The business was expanding, the tax base was expanding. It allowed us to build things like the American Bank Center, Whataburger Field, the seawall. We fixed the seawall, expanded the terminal at the airport and modernized it, raised the causeway out to the island, built Packery Channel. A lot of things that people enjoy and take for granted today. And at the same time we were doing that, we also reduced the tax rate, and we gave city employees a raise. And so it was a special time, and a lot of that is due to the decisions that the council was making. You are right in your observations is that as attorneys, we are trained to look at things analytically as opposed to emotionally, and we are trained on how to ask questions. And so those are skills that fit well into that type of government.
I think it does, and we have a lot of criticisms of attorneys, and sometimes, of course, depending upon the law school that you went to, they could be pretty abrasive. University of Houston was very abrasive, and then sometimes, again, it has to do with your values. If you come out and you could read and study, etc., but you don't have good intentions, and
well, legal profession is like any other. You're going to have good people and bad people, and I think that there's a heightened responsibility for attorneys because we are in a position of trust, and so more should be expected of us. But you're right, there are some people that don't reach those high aspirations.
Well, certainly, and we've had, though I'm not a big fan of the state bar. I'm not a fan, but we have had some lawyers locally that a fair number of solo attorneys have lost their licenses, perhaps rightly so. So we know there's some ethical issues going on. Again, I don't know that I think sometimes they pick on the solo practitioner, the person who represents people, more than the insurance defense attorney or the assistant district attorneys, et cetera. I have that disagreement, but we know that there's some ethical issues. There's a fair number of lawyers that lose their licenses.
I think part of that is that the grievance process is client driven. And so, for example, if you're representing corporations or insurance companies, and by the way, what I was doing while we were paid by the insurance company, the driver was the actual client. But grievances are client driven. And so a solo practitioner is going to be dealing more one-on-one with individual clients. And as a consequence, if something doesn't turn out the way that client expected, and by the way, part of that is on the attorney about creating reasonable expectations, they're going to be exposed, the solo practitioner is probably exposed to the grievance process more often.
To bring up an issue that isn't really on point, and again, this is Mr. Bill Kelly, a candidate for the 148th District Court. To bring up an issue that is interesting, Blake Farenthold recently said that he wasn't going to run again for his seat, congressional representative, and his defense to this complaint was that, look, there was a young woman that filed a complaint. He said against his staff, his position, but not against him personally. And therefore, when the mediator, I believe it was a mediator, said, well, do you need to settle it for $84,000? I don't know if it was an arbitration. I thought it was a mediation. That this congressional, whoever was in charge, whether it was his attorney for that congressional, whatever slush fund, I hate to call it a slush fund, but when they wanted to settle for the $84,000, he had no choice because he wasn't sued personally. And why I bring that up is I can't say that I'm necessarily a great fan of Congressional Representative Blake Farenthold, but I don't know that anybody understood what he was saying. And because I think there was veracity in what he was saying. In other words, if I'm sued, if I, God forbid, I hit somebody and I'm negligent and I have my insurance company, they settle the case, they never contact me. Do they?
Yes. Well,
they say, hey, we're going to settle it.
Okay.
Screw you.
Now, if you're sued
Right.
for after being in an accident, your insurance company, well, part of what you bought from your policy was the right for the insurance company to provide you an attorney. You're entitled to
That's right. So
have an attorney to
Right.
defend you at
Right.
the expense of the insurance company. So the insurance company does have some stake in what's going on because they're paying for the defense. Now, when a case gets settled, it does require, it should require, and when I was doing it, did require the client to say, yes, I'm going to settle.
Oh, it did? Okay, I really was unaware of that because I never, like I said, I was a clerk in insurance.
Now keep in mind, the client may be righteously indignant about, I didn't do anything wrong, and I don't want to settle, and I want to go to court and be vindicated. But you've got to have a candid conversation with that individual. If the settlement is within their policy limits, they need to understand that this case is going to get settled and it's not going to cost you a dime. But if we go to court and the jury doesn't see it the way you did, then you could be writing a check and you may not end up being vindicated. So, but that conversation does need to take place.
Okay, so what I was saying was incorrect. Basically the insured in an auto accident case who's at fault does have to give permission.
Who's been alleged to be at fault.
Right. He or she does have to give permission.
They are the actual client.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. I thought that the insurance company could settle it and just say, hey, screw you, buddy.
Well, technically no, but that's a very persuasive argument that you're not going to have to write a check. You're not going to.
Right.
You don't owe anything.
Right.
And so a very candid conversation has to take place.
Because I had understood what Mr. Farenthold, now I don't know for certain, I didn't go and research what Mr. Farenthold was saying was true, whether or not he did not have a choice to settle the case, but it sounded believable to me that, if it was recommended or whatever, and then, hey, the money was there. But that's, as an aside again, you have this political experience again from 2001 to 2009. Now, did you term out, as they say?
Yes, there are term limits on city council,
right.
And I termed out. I did four terms, and that's the limit. And at that time, I would have to sit out for one term, and then I could come back.
Right.
Since then, the council has changed the rules, and you have to sit out for, I think it's 3 terms now, or 6 years.
Okay, so you still would have been eligible then. At some point.
I could have gone back. Yeah, I could go back now if I was so inclined.
And you live in Calallen, correct?
Yes, I do.
That, I think, the last time you were on some years ago, I teased you that it looked to me like your seat was kind of gerrymandered because it's kind of long, from Calallen to actually the inner city, right?
But when you use yes, it is. But when you use the term gerrymandered, usually that is to create a safe district for, say, one party or the other.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
First of all, city council races are nonpartisan. But the way District 1 was set up, it's actually the most diverse district in the city, where in the Northwest you have very conservative voters who see issues one way, and we have a lot of West Side neighborhoods, and we had the North Side neighborhoods, and the people there saw things differently, and so it was a very challenging district to represent, and those 2 areas were just connected by geography.
Well, that's interesting. My thoughts were, I said, well, maybe they're trying to dilute the inner city Hispanic voter by having this long corridor that's extended to maybe a primarily Anglo, use that term down here, Anglo-conservative.
Well, I'll tell you what I heard, and the city system was set up as a result of a lawsuit. It used to be that everybody was elected in places in citywide elections, and they would create slates, and the lawsuit alleged that diluted minority representation on the city council. And what I was told was that when we broke it down into 3 at large and 5 districts and the mayor, that 2 of the districts were safe Hispanic or minority districts, and 2 were safe Anglo districts, and District 1 was actually the swing district. And so that was created to be the one that was most in play.
Okay. So when you were on city council,
Now, by the way, I was not there when that happened.
no, you weren't. That was way. I know that.
I'm repeating what I
Right,
was
right.
told.
So you're on city council, and how much time did it require of you while you were on city council for 8 years? 5 hours a week, 20 hours a week, 25?
No, more like 30 hours a week. I had 5 neighborhood associations in District 1. I made it a point to be at all their meetings. I had areas that had serious challenges, and I was in those neighborhoods often. And it didn't matter to me whether I got 0 votes in that district or whether that was where most of my votes came from. I went to where the work was. And so as a consequence, I was working that job a lot. It took a lot of my time.
So you spent a large part of your youth, from 2001 to 2009, working that job.
Yes.
Well, that's interesting. So you think, let me ask you this, would you have an opinion regarding whether or not city council people should be paid more, or do you think it should be primarily a labor of love and them not paid a lot of money? Or do you have you thought about that?
I do have an opinion about that. And city council members, I think there's been a raise since I've been gone. I'm not positive about that, but we got paid $500 a month, and we got a car allowance. And as a consequence, I think that dramatically limited the number of people who could run for office. If you were not an attorney or worked in some industry that allowed you that type of flexibility, you simply could not run for office because you couldn't afford to do it. So that system, I believe, eliminated a lot of otherwise qualified people who might have something interesting and unique to contribute to city government and weren't allowed to participate. If there was a living wage paid, more people could do it.
Well, I do think, though, that they have insurance, health insurance, and that's worth it's worth a lot of money.
You could buy into the health insurance the same way as city employees could. Yes, and that was a very nice
right. So that
benefit.
In this day and age, our health insurance has gotten so high. Well, so your wife is an assistant principal at Calallen Middle School for 32 years?
Well, we've been married for 32 years.
Oh.
She's been in the education industry for a while. She taught at Incarnate Word, and she did her student teaching in West Oso, and she has taught in Calallen, and now she's an assistant principal. But she's done a lot of other very interesting things as well.
But you hear some stories about young people and how they've changed, etc., and drug issues, which really weren't very apparent when I was in school.
Educators face a lot of challenges that either we were not aware of when we were children or are new, and drugs is certainly an issue, and I think that's an issue everywhere. I think that she does, and her partners on the campus that she's at do an excellent job of dealing with that. And they have implemented a lot of unique and interesting ways to address the challenges that students are facing, and that is probably the best way to eliminate those types of issues. You can't just tell someone, don't do drugs. That doesn't work. You've got to dig deeper and find out why that's going on.
So you didn't approve of Ronald Reagan's wife, President Reagan's wife, said, just say no.
Well,
she said, just say no. And I thought pretty much at that time the same as you. I said, well, that's easy to say.
Well, let's put it this way. We've tried that and it didn't work. And so we can't just keep trying that over and over again.
Well, this is interesting. Since it's coming up now, and you'll be a judge, however the voters decide, God willing,
I like your attitude about that. It's like,
and at any rate, you got somebody before you on a marijuana charge. I'm just joking. This whole deal about what do you think about the legalization? I just tell you this, even though I assume that you're just going to enforce the laws as they exist. But right now there's this legalization of marijuana going on throughout the United States. I mean, my opinion is just like anybody else's. It's like the wind. I was for the legalization of all drugs for a long time. Now that they're legalizing marijuana, now I'm a little scared. I said, I don't know if it's, So what do you think about the legalization of marijuana? Do you think that's good? Do you think that's where we need to be? Do you think it's going to increase the drug problem? And this is something, again, that really won't come up as a judge, because I'm sure that you'd be more in the line of, enforcing the laws that exist.
Yeah, let's make that clear. I'm running for judge. I'm not running for legislature, and I think that those decisions are better left to the legislature.
Right.
And it is absolutely my intention to enforce the laws as the legislature has written them.
Certainly.
And you're getting into an area, we're not supposed to talk about it. In fact, it's not ethical to talk about how we may rule on a hypothetical situation, and so I want to try to avoid doing that.
I'm not actually asking you about how you would rule on a hypothetical situation, because I've heard that from I think maybe I even researched it once. I think you're correct. But what do you think about the legalization of marijuana as a person?
I don't think that I know enough about the issue to say one way or the other. Because, as you say, I've heard the arguments that it's a gateway drug and that it's no worse than alcohol, and alcohol's legal.
Mm-hmm.
But then I've also heard the flip side of it. It is a gateway drug, and it may lead you to take worse drugs, and it does alter your the way you think. And I've heard arguments about that it has health issues as well, and I have to confess that I have not studied the issue enough to.
And you never smoked? I'm just joking. Look, I'm just teasing. Well, Kyle Holscher's been on the show a couple times. And
I've seen his car. It's like,
yeah, he has a rap, something about marijuana. I don't know. Yeah, something. I don't know. Whatever. But yeah, he's a big advocate for the legalization of marijuana, and he's very well spoken on the issue. And I've told him this, and he didn't deny it. My reservations is that did you? In my generation, I'm older than you, I think. Pretty much everybody smoked, right? And a lot of the guys got addicted, and it hurt them. It hurt their lives.
Otherwise derailed promising careers and lives. Yes.
And I knew people that got addicted and then smoked their whole lives. One friend of mine, from the time I knew him, he smoked, and then he did quit maybe 5 years ago, till his mid-50s. He smoked his whole life, and he really had, I think, his potential. It hurt his potential as a person.
And so there is part of the argument. Why would we legalize that?
Yeah. And then, like I say, Kyle Holscher, the attorney in town here, who's very, he's president of that NORML, a National Organization to Reform Marijuana Laws, I believe locally. I had discussed that with him, and I think that he tacitly admitted that, in fact, it was addictive. And then, of course, I've heard the advocates say that, of course, everything is addictive in a way, but I think that has never been intelligently discussed. It may not be a strictly physical addiction like alcohol is, but it's some sort of psychosocial
See, again, you seem to know more about it than I do.
Right.
So I don't know.
Well, like I say, maybe a different generation that were, like I said, that was pretty prominent back in college and all that. And I know one friend of mine, before I left Ohio, was trying to stop smoking. And I told him, I said, look, man, why don't, that's the way you talk, right? I said, hey, look, man, just don't ever instigate it. You could cut down, don't ever have it. If your friends want to smoke, okay, maybe that's okay. But don't have it and don't buy it yourself and offer it to them. I thought that would cut way down on his smoking marijuana.
Did he take your advice?
You know what? I lost track. I think he did for a while. I think then I eventually lost track of him. But he was another person kind of stunted in his development, I felt.
See, so you've got some anecdotal evidence
Yes, I
about
do.
the dangers of
I do.
smoking marijuana.
I do. So let's say that you win this primary, which you said is in February.
No, the early voting's in February. The election is March 6th.
Okay. Okay, early voting starts. Okay, that's fine. And then against Mr. Stolley, and then you run against, let's say, Carlos Valdez. He's the big name candidate.
Mhm.
What does it cost to run for judge? Do you have a active are you actively soliciting money, or is there a projection? Do you have a campaign manager that's a look, Bill, it's going to be $100,000 to run, or is there something like that?
I do have a campaign manager, and we have been actively raising money. Now, as far as my campaign goals and plans, I'd rather not broadcast those, but it is not cheap to run for office.
I do think that one thing about Guy Williams, I think that maybe because he'd run many times before he eventually ran, and I think because maybe he got in under a Republican sweep, I don't think that he ever had to kind of, it wasn't typical. It was atypical the way that he got in, I think. So you could get lucky if there's a big Republican sweep or something, and you may not need the money, but you never know if that's going to happen, of course.
Well, I don't want to leave it to luck. We're working really hard, and so I'm not going to sit back and hope that it's just my turn.
No, of course not. Okay, and then I see here in the Corpus Christi Caller-Times, state you have a judicial temperament. I'm not quick to anger. I'm very patient.
And part of my recent career, I think, has really honed that. The judges and the lawyers recognize that part of my personality, and I got approached to start mediating cases, to resolve cases in mediation. And part of the reason I've been so successful, and I'm doing up to 250 mediations a year and settling 96% of them. And a big part of that is the way I approach people, with respect and patience. I listen to what they have to say, and because of that, or at least in part because of that, I've been able to resolve so many cases. And even more than that, as a result of the mediations, I end up having to do a lot of arbitrations where there's a disagreement about what the mediation meant. And that is exactly the judge's perspective. And so in addition to honing those types of personality traits that I think help you be a good judge, I have actually maybe taken an intermediate step towards the position of judge by having to do arbitrations and doing the mediations themselves. I get that perspective of what the judge sees. I get to hear both sides of the story. While I don't get to rule except in the arbitrations, it has exposed me to what I would anticipate I would see on the bench.
Yeah, I was talking to you before the show, and I said I used you for mediation once for an ERISA case, Employment Retirement Income Security Act case, and I was pleased with your ability to mediate. I thought you were one of the better mediators I'd ever used.
Thank you.
And plus, you were cheaper. I think that's why we used you.
Well, and
now I don't know. Maybe you haven't kept your rates as low as they were back then, but that might have been 7 years ago or so.
Well, my rates have creeped up, but originally when I started doing mediations, that was part of my motivation. I believed in the system, and it was too expensive for a lot of people to use, and so I was charging less. But because I've been so successful at it, I've been asked to do more and more mediations, and it is now I'm half complex litigation, half mediation, and because I do so many mediations, I had to raise the price because it was cutting into the other aspects of my practice.
To be a mediator, what do you have to do? You have to take a week's school or something, or training or something?
Yes, and to do family law, there's another 27 hours of training.
You also have to have physical facilities to do it. I don't know that especially when I was younger and more emotionally volatile. I don't know if anybody would hire me to be a mediator, but like this building, we have because it was a fourplex, all the rooms are small, and you have to have access to quite a bit of rooms to separate the parties, etc.
The building I'm in is well suited for
It
it.
seemed that way.
There is a large conference room towards the front of the building, and then there's a good sized library towards the back of the building. And as a consequence, the parties are in different parts of the building. They can't hear each other. They rarely see each other.
Right. You still have law books?
Yes, I do.
I got rid of most of mine, and
Well,
I got rid of most of mine, and because most of that stuff is available free online. And as a matter of fact, the place is still torn up because I'm trying to. I have extra bookshelves laying around, etc.
we do most of our research online as well.
Right.
But
They're props now.
Yeah,
I'm just
well, in a sense, people do expect to see law books in a law firm, and we have not taken them off the shelves.
I've taken a lot of mine down, and part of that is because we just don't have the space. Your place is very, very large, and you practice with another attorney, but your place is very large. Who's that?
Kelly Cook.
Okay, and is she part owners of the building?
She owns the building with me, but our law firms are separate.
Does she do family law as well?
Yes, she does.
Oh, well, you have somebody to bounce ideas off of. I don't know.
Well, and that's another thing. There were some attorneys that helped me when I was starting out, and so I feel a very strong obligation to help the younger attorneys when they've got questions, paying it forward essentially. It helps the general practice of law, and it helps the individual attorneys, and so that is a big part of the way I practice law.
Well, that's very idealistic of you to say that. I told you I had several law clerks here, but maybe 5 through the years. So they're expected to work,
Well, another part of it is that I've spoken at legal seminars. And in fact, I'm scheduled to speak on one in April.
You get free credit. I'm just teasing.
Well, it's not free. You do have to prepare for your speech.
Yeah, you do. You do. Was that in regards to mediation or family law?
The most recent one will be about mediation, yes. But I have spoken on family law issues as well.
And why don't you explain, to make certain who's ever watching this knows what's going on, what is mediation?
Well, mediation is an alternative dispute resolution process where parties can go to resolve their disputes without having to go to court. And the way I do it is that the attorney and their client will come, and one will be in one room, one will be the other, and then I allow them to tell me what's going on in their case, why they should win, and I go back and forth and try to learn about the person, what's motivating them, what their real goals are, and then work out a resolution that both of them can live with. And I think this is particularly important when there are parent-child issues, because it's damaging to the children to have their parents fighting over them, or just fighting in general. And going to court is a very destructive way for parents to resolve their differences and disputes. And so in some ways I consider it a calling. But it's a less expensive, less intrusive, and less destructive way for people to resolve their disputes.
Then going to trial.
Then going to trial, yes.
I see. And most of the mediations are half day, or are they full day?
Typically, we schedule half-day mediations. If there are particularly vexing issues or the clients are particularly entrenched, we may schedule a full-day mediation. And it is not unusual also for a mediation to go over the scheduled time. And so if for example, the lawyers warn me that it's going to be a particularly complex case, but they don't want to set it up for a full-day mediation, I may schedule that for an afternoon mediation, so that if we are making progress, we will continue working into the evening to get a resolution. I've been at my office as late as midnight trying to get a case settled, and usually we do. 96% of the time we do.
Yeah, I've had that too, wherein you would stay late, or then you were at you were pretty close, but the mediation ended, and then some of the mediators were nice and helped us even after the mediation was over.
I've done quite a bit of that as well.
Right.
If it does stick with me if a case doesn't settle, and I think about something that after the mediation that did not occur to me while it was going on, I will contact the attorneys and see if this new approach or new idea might settle the case. I do have concern for the people that come to me either for litigation or mediation.
Okay, looking at your card, elect Bill Kelly for 148th District Court Judge, member of the Northwest Rotary Club.
Mm-hmm.
You know what is, I've heard of these, I hear of different civic organizations for
Right.
years, and then I don't know what they are. So what is Rotary?
Rotary is a civic organization, and its big goal, global goal, is
Take over the world. It's a conspiracy.
Eradication of polio. And
Is that right?
Yes.
I did not know that.
And they have committed resources and millions of dollars towards the eradication of polio. But they do a lot of other projects. We're encouraged to do local projects and to do national and international projects, digging water wells, providing schools on maybe an international basis. Here locally, we do a lot of scholarships to help kids go to college.
I was unaware of that relationship to polio.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're a board member of the Metro Ministries Board of Directors. And I hear a lot about Metro Ministries. And what is Metro Ministries?
Metro Ministries was a multi-denominational reaction to homeless population in Corpus Christi. Numerous churches got together and decided to have a coordinated effort to deal with homeless issues. The Metro Ministries is Loaves and Fishes and Rainbow House, Rustic House. So you've got it. Basically, it does it a disservice to call it a soup kitchen. We have a first-class chef, and they provide
Who? Loaves and Fishes?
Loaves and Fishes, and they provide.
I never heard that, but I've always thought the image of having a soup kitchen was kind of funny, but I never heard that about Loaves and Fishes.
No, they get perfect scores on their kitchen every time. We had our board meetings at lunch, and we ate what was being served.
Interesting.
Yes, and the food was excellent.
So could I go over there and get myself a meal today?
You could.
There's no showing. I don't have to show I'm poverty-stricken or anything.
You have to be sober and not high, but no, you don't have to prove
Don't look
that
at me
you.
that way. No. That's the only.
Well, I don't know. We had this conversation about marijuana. But no, you don't have. You don't.
I'm making no admissions. No, that's interesting. That's interesting.
And then Rainbow House is a shelter for women and children, but it's way more than that, because they don't just go to stay there. We teach them life skills, we teach them job skills, we help them find jobs. And in other words, it's not a stagnant thing. We are trying to move people forward so that they don't need our services in the future. And then the Gabbard Clinic would be another thing where we provide medical care for the homeless community, collect eyeglasses, and dentist comes in, provides dental care. But then the biggest thing that we do is training, helping people break the cycle of poverty, and those people that want to get off the streets, we help them develop the skills necessary to do that. So it is way more than just a shelter or a kitchen. Metro Ministries is something that the entire community can be proud of, and I'm proud of the 2 terms I did on their board.
Well, when we were discussing, we were talking before the show, talking shop, and I was telling you that all of a sudden I have had all these problems here by Christus Spine shoreline with homelessness, et cetera, that we never had. They used to be more like downtown. I don't know if the hospital draws them, if it's easier to panhandle. I don't know if they want to be closer to an emergency room. well, I've had a number of problems. And when I had run for mayor, I said, well, nobody's talking about the homeless issue. It is an issue. And it's gotten worse in Corpus Christi, and it's gotten worse nationally. So I'm not saying that, necessarily really bad here. So what's your perspective on it? Could you give a perspective? What's causing homelessness? What are the solutions? And then I may throw in.
I do have some insights because Metro Ministries is on Leopard Street, and that was part of the district that I represented. And I can remember at one time there was a crisis, and quite frankly, the crisis was caused by San Antonio sending their homeless people here.
Okay, let's get into that because that's very interesting. I'd always heard that rumor, and it was never proven, but it was actually true that they were giving them what, a bus ticket, or how were they getting that?
That's what was my understanding, and I heard that from the police officers who ran that beat, and I heard it from some of the business owners along Leopard Street, like near Crosstown, and these people were there on the ground, and one business owner in particular, he used to pay some homeless people a little bit of money to sweep up his parking lot at night, and they felt vested in his business, so they were like watching it. And so he'd pay them a little bit of money to do that. And he said, all of a sudden, we've got all these people from San Antonio, they're beating up the people that are here, and they're very aggressive. And so I did not see someone get off a bus from San Antonio to live on our streets. But the people that I felt as though were in a position to know were telling me that. And so I believed it. And so Metro Ministries, I felt, was part of the solution to that. That's how I got introduced to Metro Ministries. I mean, I always knew they were there, but because of this issue and because of my position on the city council, I got to be more aware of what was going on and their role in that mission. We got the police more involved, and there was a good neighborhood policing program going on at the time I was on the city council, and I worked very closely with those officers to deal with the issue. I had a relationship with the sheriff's department at that time, and because the jail would be involved in that as well. Which is not a perfect solution. Putting homeless people, especially those that may have mental issues, in the jail just creates.
Sheriff Kalin has been on the show and he's discussed that he didn't think that was a good approach.
And I agree with it. It is not. And part of that comes from the closing of the state hospitals. That's where they used to go. And I know that was expensive for the state, but that shifts the financial burden of dealing with these issues from state level to the local level. So I do have some familiarity with it, and yes, that population, of course, is notoriously transient, and so if there's a reason why where they normally hang out is not convenient for them, they'll find someplace else, and apparently right now that is around your building. So.
Well, I want to, just giving, again, this is supposed to be your voice, not mine, but it is an interesting issue for me. I did have a client that came in not too long ago that said I believe he was from somewhere, well, he was from Colorado, perhaps Denver. I said, well, what brought you down here? Because he was obviously homeless and had no assets or anything. It was a Social Security disability case. That's kind of, so it falls into my practice to a certain extent. And he said, I went to this shelter or something in Denver, whatever city in Colorado it was, and they had a sheet of paper that had the best programs for the homeless.
Wow.
And he seemed very honest, and this, this didn't seem like a...
Well, you're his lawyer. Why would he lie to you?
Yeah, right. He said, so they had this sheet of paper saying what had the best programs, and Corpus Christi was on the list.
The city itself, or
yes, the Corpus Christi had some of the better homeless programs, and they were on the list, so that's why he came.
And that may be the church programs through Metro Ministries.
Well, and that goes to show you what, you hate to speak too conservatively because, you're consider yourself whatever, a liberal or passionate or very a humanitarian, but you're saying, well, then it's a case where in the more programs you have, the more people you draw.
That is the danger. Yes.
And you did state, of course, that one of the programs that you were talking about, I think it was Rainbow House, you're trying to get people working again, etc.
Yes.
Well, I don't know, one of the things I think that's a problem, and I haven't read this, but they say homeless. He's homeless. But that's a symptom, the homelessness. Some of these people are drug addicts, right?
Yes.
Some of them have mental problems.
That is true.
Some of them are there for economic reasons.
That's
so
true.
It seems like it's more of a symptom, and the homelessness is just a result.
We would have the best results with the last group that you're
Right.
talking about. Those are people that do not want to live on the street. Those are people that would want to improve their circumstances, and they lack the skills or circumstances in some manner have driven them to the streets. And you will have the most luck with that group. Drug addicts, they clearly, the drug addiction is the problem, and they're not going to get off the street until they address that underlying issue. For mental illness, once again, until their issues are addressed, they're not getting off the street. And teaching them how to write checks, teaching them how to budget, teaching them how to apply for a job, educating them about the importance of showing up to work every day. You don't fix a drug addict or a mentally ill person by educating them about the importance of showing up to work, and or giving them the opportunity to learn job skills. So there's not one fix to the situation.
It is, and then the fourth group that we didn't discuss that was talked about by Good Sam's coming on the show, is that there's a certain percentage that are panhandlers that have a lifestyle. They like living on the streets.
Yeah, there are some people who just like it, and you're not going to get them to leave the streets because they like it.
Well, if you look at the responsibility and the complexity of modern life with whatever it is, credit cards and payments and overhead and paperwork,
By the
etc.
way, the city is trying to address that by encouraging people not to give money to the panhandlers. If you want to help a homeless person, donate to Good Samaritan, Metro Ministry, or something like that.
Even the Catholic Church, Bishop Carmody was on the show and said, do not give.
Right.
Do not give.
Because you are supporting a segment of the population.
We've only got about 3 minutes left. Bill, always nice having you on and talking shop about law and all, but you are a candidate for the 148th District Court, and so, do you have a final spiel?
Yeah, I do.
Final
talk. This talk really was, we talked more about my life experiences as opposed to my legal experiences, and I think that that's an important aspect of what's required of a judge. Because at the end of the day, you're not just doing the nuts and bolts of a trial. You are judging people. And having been a city councilman, dealing with crime issues and the issues that are challenging neighborhoods and the people in those neighborhoods, being on Metro Ministries and dealing with the challenges of people in the lowest echelon of our society, I think has given me some insight into, and the mediation in particular, has given me insight into people. And I think that those are valuable skills that will help me on the bench. I have been asked to run for years, ever since I got off the city council for sure, and I felt as though it was important that I accumulate these life experiences before I aspired to judge other people. And so I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about those things.
Nice having you on. This
Thank
is Mr. Bill Kelly, candidate for the 148th District Court. Thank you.
Took a ride with little old Lucy Brown. We went to all the honky-tonks. We really got around. She's 5'2" with eyes of blue and pretty as a queen. I didn't know her pop was a city cop and she was just 15. Good morning, Judge. Why do you look so mean, sir? And Mr. Judge, What can the charges be? If there's been trouble, I will plead not guilty. It must be someone else. You know it can't be me.